William didn't know that Harry and Meghan had already recorded their poison.
For weeks, the palace insisted nothing unusual had happened. No official appointment. No formal invitation. No private reconciliation. But behind guarded doors, Meghan Markle had reportedly entered a meeting with King Charles that almost no one inside the royal household was prepared to acknowledge. The first signs did not come from an announcement. They came from small inconsistencies that refused to disappear. A royal schedule was quietly adjusted. Security movements appeared to change without explanation. Senior aides who normally demanded answers were reportedly told not to ask questions. Nothing was confirmed. Yet too many pieces had shifted at once for the silence to feel accidental. This was not said to be an ordinary family conversation. There were no public photographs, no ceremonial welcome, and no carefully prepared statement about reconciliation. Meghan was allegedly granted something far more unusual: direct, private access to the king, outside the normal structure that surrounds almost every royal encounter, and Harry may not have been in the room. That detail changed everything. For years, Harry had stood publicly beside Meghan, defending her against the palace, the press, and even members of his own family. Yet the most sensitive conversation concerning her future connection to the monarchy may have taken place without him beside her. Whether he approved of the meeting, knew only part of the plan, or learned its full purpose later remained unclear. Inside the palace, competing explanations began to circulate. One version described it as a deeply personal discussion between a father-in-law and the woman married to his youngest son. Another suggested the conversation went much further, touching titles, money, future invitations, family access, and the position of Archie and Lilibet within the royal story. Meghan was not believed to have arrived in triumph. She carried years of rejection, anger, humiliation, and unfinished questions. Her departure from royal life had given her freedom, but it had also left her status permanently uncertain. She was still a duchess, still connected to the king, yet separated from the institution that gave those connections meaning. Charles faced a conflict just as painful. As monarch, he had to protect the crown from another damaging crisis. As a father, he could not ignore the suffering surrounding Harry or the distance separating him from his grandchildren. Then came the most troubling question. Why had William's office reportedly received so little warning? Why was Camilla's household told only limited details? And why were communications staff instructed that no public response would be authorized? The secrecy suggested Meghan had not come only to repair a broken relationship. She was believed to be carrying a specific request involving inheritance, royal identity, family legitimacy, and control of what the public would be allowed to know. But before anyone could understand what Meghan wanted from Charles, one question had to be answered first. How had she managed to reach the king without the palace machinery stopping her? Meghan had learned during her time inside the monarchy that official doors were rarely the only doors. Behind private secretaries, household advisors, and rigid protocols existed quieter roots, personal loyalties, old promises, and emotional pressure points the public would never see. Direct access to the monarch was never casual. Every request was normally filtered, scheduled, recorded, and examined by people trained to protect the crown from surprise. Even family conversations could pass through layers of approval. That was why Meghan's reported ability to reach Charles carried such weight. Either the king had personally permitted the secrecy, or someone close enough to him had quietly opened a path the wider household could not block. At the center of that path was believed to be a discreet intermediary connected to both Charles and Harry. The identity remained hidden. It may have been an old family friend, a former palace employee, a legal representative, or someone linked to charitable work. Whoever it was understood how to phrase the request so it would not be dismissed before reaching the king. Meghan did not allegedly ask for reconciliation. She described the matter as urgent and concerning the future of the family. The wording was careful. It sounded personal enough to touch Charles as a father, yet serious enough to demand his attention as monarch. Then came the names Archie and Lilibet. Distance had turned the children into one of the conflict's deepest emotional wounds. Their royal titles linked them to the crown, but their lives remained far outside its walls. For Charles, the possibility of losing a meaningful relationship with his grandchildren was not simply a public embarrassment. It was a private pain that duty could not completely silence. Meghan understood that vulnerability. But she also knew tenderness did not equal surrender. She could appeal to Charles as a grandfather, yet she would still face a king surrounded by advisors trained to recognize pressure, risk, and hidden consequences. Resistance emerged almost immediately. At least one senior aide allegedly warned that a private conversation could later be retold publicly, leaving the palace unable to challenge Meghan's version without exposing confidential details. William saw an even greater danger. Years of interviews, accusations, documentaries, and disputed private exchanges had hardened his position. To him, secrecy offered no protection. It created another conversation that could one day be used against the institution. Harry's involvement remained uncertain. He may have known Meghan intended to make contact, but not the exact timing, the full purpose, or the assurances she hoped to secure. That uncertainty placed him between his wife's strategy and his family's suspicion. Before Meghan had spoken a single word to Charles, she had already proved something that unsettled the palace. She could still reach the king through channels William did not fully control. And when Meghan finally entered the private room, the carefully controlled language of family healing reportedly disappeared, replaced by a demand Charles had feared might one day return. The palace may have expected regret, compromise, or an appeal for peace. Instead, Meghan reportedly arrived with a carefully structured argument about dignity, protection, titles, and the future of her children, turning an emotional meeting into a confrontation over what the monarchy still owed the Sussex family. Her opening position was direct. The Sussexes, she argued, had never received a clear and permanent settlement defining what their relationship with the crown was supposed to become. They had stepped away from royal duties, but the questions left behind had never truly disappeared. Security remained contested. Invitations arrived with conditions. Access to royal properties was uncertain. Family occasions became political calculations. Even the treatment of Archie and Lilibet seemed to shift depending on the pressure surrounding the palace. That uncertainty, Meghan reportedly suggested, was not accidental. The monarchy benefited from ambiguity. When it suited the institution, Harry was still the king's son, a prince, and part of a family whose name carried global power. But when scandal or criticism erupted, the Sussexes were treated as outsiders who had no right to expect protection, explanation, or support. Then, the conversation turned to titles. For Meghan, the issue was not simply whether Archie and Lilibet could use royal styles. It was whether those titles would carry any real meaning in Britain as William and his children moved closer to the center of the monarchy. A title without recognition could become little more than a reminder of exclusion. And the inheritance at stake was far greater than money. It involved identity. History, belonging, family traditions passed from one generation to the next. Meghan wanted her children to understand the institution from which they descended, rather than learning about it only through headlines, accusations, and silence. Charles listened, but gave little away. His restraint became its own form of pressure. Meghan could not tell whether he was moved by her argument, calculating the political cost, or quietly preparing to refuse everything she had asked. She then raised the question of future royal events. Would the Sussex family be invited to major ceremonies only to face humiliating seating arrangements, restricted appearances, or last-minute changes designed to remind them of their reduced status. Beneath every demand sat a deeper fear. Once William became king, even the remaining informal connections could vanish. This meeting may have been Meghan's final chance to secure an understanding before the balance of power changed permanently. Charles understood the danger. Any promise he made could be seen as overruling his heir and weakening William before his reign had even begun. Then Meghan reportedly produced a proposal so sensitive that Charles asked for the room to be cleared, leaving only the two of them and one confidential document. Whatever was written on that document changed the atmosphere instantly. Because Meghan was no longer asking how the Sussexes could return, she was asking what the Crown would guarantee before they ever considered coming back. The document was not a resignation, an apology, or a public statement. It was reportedly a private framework part family agreement, part royal protection plan designed to secure Meghan and Harry's position before Charles's reign ended and William gained complete control. It carried no legal force on its own. There were no parliamentary seals, no constitutional guarantees, and no signatures binding the future king. Yet its power came from something more dangerous. It asked Charles to put private royal assurances into writing. The first request concerned Archie and Lilibet. Meghan allegedly wanted formal recognition that the children would remain included in major family milestones, regardless of the growing hostility between their parents and William. Weddings, funerals, jubilees, and other defining occasions would not become weapons in an adult conflict. The next demand went directly to Harry's status. Meghan reportedly asked for advance notice and direct communication before any decision affecting his title, ceremonial position, place in the succession, or public connection to the crown. No more learning through headlines. No more unexplained changes delivered through distant officials. Then came security. Meghan wanted a clear process for family visits to Britain, replacing repeated uncertainty and negotiations through people she no longer trusted. The proposal also requested suitable royal accommodation during official or private visits, not necessarily a permanent residence, but a place where the family could stay without every return becoming another public struggle. Another clause touched one of the palace's deepest sensitivities, unnamed briefings. Meghan reportedly argued that private disagreements had repeatedly escaped into the press, reshaping her image before she could respond. She wanted Charles to prevent household tensions from being turned into public weapons. That was when the atmosphere shifted. Charles could offer reassurance as a father. But as king, he could not easily promise how the Sussexes would be treated during William's reign. Any agreement extending beyond his lifetime risked challenging the authority of his successor before William had even taken the throne. There was another fear. What if the document eventually became public? A written promise from the king could become explosive evidence in a future dispute. Meghan may have offered confidentiality, but Charles knew how quickly private words could become part of a larger media war. Meghan's answer was simple. Verbal promises had failed before. Conversations had been denied. Memories had conflicted. Informal assurances had vanished the moment pressure returned. To her, writing was not aggression. It was protection. Then Charles reached the final request. Meghan and Harry wanted a protected place at major national events, allowing them to appear as members of the king's family without returning to full-time royal duty. It was the old conflict in a new form, royal recognition without complete royal control. Charles finally asked the question neither of them could avoid. Was this truly about access to family? Or was Meghan quietly negotiating a path back into royal life? Meghan's answer finally revealed why the meeting had been arranged in secret and why the palace has never offered a clear explanation of what Charles decided behind those closed doors. The meeting was not simply an attempt to bring Meghan back into royal life. It was an effort to create a new position outside the old rules, a protected Sussex role sanctioned by Charles, independent of palace employment, and difficult for William to dismantle. That was the true purpose of Meghan's private approach. She was allegedly seeking recognition of a semi-official family role for herself, Harry, and their children, before Charles's reign ended, and William gained complete authority over the monarchy. This was not a proposal to return to ordinary royal duty. Meghan had no desire to step back into the hierarchy. Restrictions, press agreements, and constant institutional control that had defined her life as a working duchess. She wanted something different, something the palace had rejected before, but which she believed could no longer be ignored. Under the proposal, the Sussexes would continue living abroad. They would keep their private projects, financial independence, and public identities, but at selected royal ceremonies, charitable occasions, and major national events, they would receive formal recognition as members of the king's family. For Charles, the emotional appeal was obvious. It offered a way to rebuild contact with Harry and his grandchildren without demanding a humiliating surrender from either side. No public apology. No dramatic return. No admission that one side had defeated the other. But institutionally, the plan was explosive. It risked reviving the very arrangement royal officials had once refused, independence outside the palace combined with status inside it. Meghan reportedly described the idea as modernization, not privilege. She argued that rigid exclusion would only make the monarchy look colder and more divided. A family spread across different countries, she suggested, could still serve the crown's wider interests without obeying an outdated model. Charles remained unconvinced. He questioned whether Meghan truly wanted a relationship with the royal family or merely the access, prestige, and protection connected to it. The question cut deeply. To Meghan, it was proof that even after everything she had endured, the palace still treated her motives as suspicious. Harry's position made the situation even more complicated. He may not have approved every part of the framework. Meghan could have seen the meeting as a way to preserve choices for him, while Harry remained torn between loyalty to his wife, bitterness toward the institution, and a private longing for the family role he had lost. Meghan then delivered her warning. Permanent exclusion would not end the crisis. It would create years of questions about why a king refused meaningful contact with his own son and grandchildren. Charles did not sign the document. But he did not tear it apart. He reportedly kept it for further review and offered one limited possibility: clearer communication, better family access, and future invitations. But only if the Sussexes protected private conversations and stopped turning every disagreement into a public confrontation. Meghan left without the guarantee she wanted, yet she had not entirely failed. Charles had listened, he had kept the proposal, and he had admitted the existing arrangement could not continue forever. That was why the palace remained silent. Confirming the meeting would reveal that concessions had been considered. Denying it could become dangerous if records later surfaced. Then, William learned what had happened. For William, the greatest betrayal was not that Meghan had asked for a new royal position, it was that his father had listened without first telling the man expected to inherit the consequences. I want you to write a detailed script based on the outline I provide about Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and the British monarchy using a bold, dramatic, and immersive storytelling approach. The script should be structured according to the provided subheading, ensuring that each section builds upon the previous one without abrupt endings or disconnections. The script must maintain a smooth, continuous narrative flow rather than feeling segmented, and follow the word count length mentioned with each outline. Write in paragraph format. Please keep the hook and transition line the same as in the outline section. Tone and style. The script should have a bold, cinematic, and suspenseful tone to keep the audience engaged. The storytelling should be narrative-driven, focusing on mystery, foreshadowing, and emotional highs and lows. Avoid a dry biographical format. The script should feel like an investigative and shocking expose. No visual descriptions, scene instructions, or visual storytelling elements. This should be purely narrative. Use a mix of short and long sentences to control pacing and enhance drama. Engagement techniques that must be used, cliffhangers and foreshadowing must be incorporated to build suspense. Ensure the script remains emotional and immersive, making the audience feel the struggles, triumphs, and betrayals. No standalone endings in any section. Each section should naturally flow into the next subheading without abrupt conclusions. Use bold and dramatic phrasing to emphasize key moments, struggles, and turning points. Highlight the contrast between success and suffering, making the story compelling. Section breakdown and storytelling approach. Each section must maintain a smooth transition, ensuring a continuous flow of storytelling. The narrative should be engaging, avoiding unnecessary factual overload. Avoid listing events mechanically. Each event must be woven into the broader arc of their journey. The script should not reset at each subheading, but carry the momentum forward, ensuring previous and next subheadings remain connected. Language and accessibility. Use simple yet powerful language that is accessible to a broad audience. Maintain a storytelling approach, so the script should feel like a dramatic retelling rather than an encyclopedia entry. Avoid formal or academic tones, but the language should feel conversational and immersive. Ensure vivid descriptions through strong word choice rather than relying on visual cues or direct scene instructions. Here is the section. Section number. 6 section heading. William's reaction behind palace doors. This section's content. Word count. Deply 470 words, tone and style. Bold, cinematic, suspenseful, and emotionally immersive. Hook. William had spent years preparing for a monarchy built on discipline, clarity, and fewer uncontrolled figures. Then he discovered that Meghan had privately presented Charles with a plan capable of restoring the Sussexes to royal life, without placing them under his authority. Key points. Present William learning about the meeting through incomplete internal reports rather than directly from Charles. This deepens his sense that important decisions affecting his future reign had been discussed around him. Show William's objection as larger than personal dislike. He believes the monarchy cannot function if individuals retain royal prestige while operating independently, criticizing the institution and negotiating their participation event by event. Explore William's fear that Meghan's proposed role would create permanent instability. Every coronation, funeral, wedding, jubilee, state occasion, and family crisis could become another argument over whether the Sussexes were included. Reveal William's anger that Meghan approached Charles privately. From his perspective, she selected the one person most vulnerable to emotional appeals involving Harry and the grandchildren. Introduce tension between Charles and William. Charles sees his son's position as unforgiving, while William sees his father's hesitation as dangerous weakness. Show Catherine becoming an important but restrained presence. She understands the emotional damage caused by the Sussex conflict, but also recognizes that continued ambiguity places pressure on her children and the future structure of the monarchy. Present William demanding that no written assurance be issued without his office reviewing it. This request creates a direct power struggle over whether Charles can make family promises independent of his heir. Introduce the possibility that William wanted all copies of Meghan's framework formally recorded and secured. He feared selective leaks could later make the palace appear dishonest or vindictive. Explore Harry's reaction when he learns William is resisting the proposal. Harry interprets the opposition as confirmation that William intends to erase the Sussex branch once Charles is no longer able to protect them. Emphasize that the conflict is not simply between brothers. It is between two competing ideas of monarchy. Charles's instinct to preserve family ties and William's determination to protect the crown through firm boundaries foreshadow that Camilla had her own reasons for opposing the arrangement. Unlike William, her concerns were not only about royal structure, they were about what Meghan may have said privately to Charles. Transition line: as William fought the proposal's future consequences, Camilla turned her attention to the meeting itself. Convinced that Meghan had used the private audience to reopen wounds the king had never fully escaped. Generate a detailed documentary-style script based on the provided outline and subheading. Maintain a bold, dramatic, and engaging storytelling approach with smooth transitions between sections. Avoid word repetition and ensure each section flows naturally into the next. Avoid adding outline headings, just write the script and follow the word's count length given along with each outline above. Don't exceed the mentioned word count in section. Story must move forward and shouldn't repeat the meeting had ended, but its emotional damage was only beginning. Camilla feared Meghan had gained private influence over Charles, while Harry began to suspect that both the palace and his wife had made decisions about his future without revealing the complete truth. For Camilla, the secrecy was the first warning. She understood that families sometimes needed private conversations, especially after years of bitterness. But this had not been a simple exchange of regrets. Meghan had arrived with a structured proposal, specific demands, and a plan that could affect the monarchy beyond Charles's reign. That made the meeting political. Her deeper concern was what Meghan may have said about the king's own household. Any criticism of anonymous palace briefings, selective leaks, or hostile advisors could lead directly toward people close to Camilla. And beneath that fear sat an even more personal threat: Harry's belief that Camilla had influenced negative stories about him and Meghan. Even without a direct accusation, reopening that wound could place Charles under intense emotional pressure. Camilla reportedly urged him not to respond from guilt. Every concession, she warned, could become a precedent. Every private promise could later be presented as evidence that the palace had admitted wrongdoing. But while Camilla worried about Meghan's influence, Harry was confronting a different betrayal. He began to understand that Meghan had raised issues he had not fully authorized. He supported protection for Archie and Lilibet. He wanted clearer contact with his father. Yet the idea of returning to selected royal occasions under negotiated terms forced him into a painful contradiction. Harry had condemned the institution's treatment of his family. Still, he remained deeply attached to his title, his military past, his heritage, and his place as the king's son. He wanted distance from royal control, but not complete erasure. Meghan defended her decision. She believed Harry's anger often trapped him between outrage and longing, leaving practical solutions untouched. Charles would not remain king forever, she argued, and someone had to act before the opportunity disappeared. That explanation did not end the conflict between them. It sharpened it. Harry questioned whether the proposal offered a path toward healing or represented a retreat from everything they had publicly claimed. Meghan insisted that protecting their children mattered more than preserving a perfect public position. Then another doubt emerged. Meghan may not have shared Charles's full response because it was neither acceptance nor refusal. The uncertainty offered hope, but it also gave Harry reason to wonder what else had been left unsaid. When he contacted his father, Charles answered with guarded language and refused to discuss the meeting through insecure channels. To Harry, that restraint suggested William and Camilla had already intervened. Palace staff were now trapped. A denial could be contradicted. Confirmation would trigger demands for details. Silence allowed suspicion to grow. Then came rumors of a confidential review into the Sussexes' future position. The palace could contain the document, restrict the briefings, and silence the aides, but it could not erase the question now hanging over the monarchy. What would Charles ultimately choose? His authority as king or his guilt as a father? No statement came. No photograph appeared. No official denial closed the story. Instead, the palace chose its most familiar weapon, silence. But this time, the silence did not bury the mystery. It exposed how divided the royal family had become over Meghan's request. The refusal to answer carried its own meaning. Palace communications teams could dismiss clearly false claims with a brief denial, yet this story remained trapped behind careful wording and deliberate uncertainty. No one confirmed the meeting. No one completely rejected it. Every response seemed designed to close the conversation without making a claim that might later be disproved. At the center of that silence was Charles, delaying a choice that could wound his family either way. If he rejected Meghan completely, Harry's estrangement could become permanent. If he accepted even part of the proposal, he risked damaging his trust with William, the man expected to inherit both the crown and the consequences. William responded by strengthening the boundaries around future contact. Any conversation with the Sussexes would need to be recorded, coordinated, and understood by the relevant offices. No more private approaches capable of quietly changing royal policy before the future king even knew they had occurred. Meghan, meanwhile, left without the protected role she had requested. But she had forced Charles to confront questions the palace had survived by keeping vague. What place did Harry still hold? What did the crown owe his children? And could family membership exist without institutional obedience? Harry now stood between two painful futures. One required accepting that his royal life was finished. The other demanded rebuilding trust under conditions that could feel like surrender. Charles' deepest fear was not another interview, accusation, or documentary. It was leaving the conflict unresolved and forcing William to inherit a fracture that might follow the monarchy for another generation. That emotional inheritance would not stop with Harry and William. Archie, Lilibet, George, Charlotte, and Louis could grow up as one extended family, or as symbols of two royal branches separated by decisions they never made. And the document remained surrounded by unanswered questions. Was it preserved in an archive? Did Charles send it to constitutional advisors? Did William receive every page? Did Meghan keep proof of the king's response? A future ceremony, illness, transition, or unexpected reconciliation could bring those answers into the open. The meeting did not create a dramatic reunion. It revealed something more dangerous. Charles had not completely closed the door, William was determined not to reopen it, and Harry and Meghan were unwilling to vanish quietly. Every invitation, title decision, seating arrangement, and family appearance would now be searched for evidence of a promise that may, or may not, have been made. Because inside the monarchy, the most important decisions are rarely announced. When they are made, they are revealed years later. Through the people who were welcomed back, the names quietly removed, and the promises no one was ever supposed to know existed.